Do you think this earns Terry McLaurin more targets because he is the alpha? I get they have Diami Brown and a couple other guys, but he's it.
I don't think it actually. So if we're talking about last season, and if it earns him more targets than he had last season, no. 132 last year in an offense that threw the ball actually the most in football. I don't think even with the Dotson leaving, I don't think that Terry's going to go much higher. Maybe 140, like maybe he gets like 8 more targets. That's not enough to be like, hey, I got to move this guy up. But it's about the quality of the targets. Terry McLaurin has had 4 straight seasons with 1,000 yards. And, his biggest issue, has been just quality of quarterback play, and he's not a heavy, he's never gone over 80 in the last 3 seasons. He hasn't gone over 80 catches. In 2020, he had 134, so 2 more targets, and he had 87 catches. It was his best season in terms of just that kind of production. And he was wide receiver 20. In 2022, he was wide receiver 14, but it's because he fell into the end zone one more time, and he had like 90 more yards. But he actually had less catches than that year, 10 less catches. So that just might have been a year where there wasn't a lot of, maybe there was a lot of injuries to the top wideouts. I don't really remember what was going on that year. So to answer your question, it doesn't really change much for my feelings on Terry. If anything, it actually could bump him down for me just off the fact alone that this team may run the ball even more than I expected. And, there's not another guy to take away attention from Terry, who's probably going to get double teamed the whole time.
Now, so there was, we don't have a lot to go off of, but it seems like in the Kyler Murray Cliff systems, there was the focal point receiver. Hopkins had 2 seasons in that offense where he averaged north of 10 targets per game. I'm not saying Terry's going to get that, but is there a world where, because last year was at 7.6, can he see an extra target per game? I do think there's a world where that happens. Maybe he gets closer to that 150 mark. And even if he does, if he is getting draped with coverage, he's good enough to come down with the ball. He's good enough to get those contested catches. Like, as bad as it's been for Terry McLaurin, because I don't want to call him a bust because it's not his fault that he's in his situation. He has had at least 900 yards in every season. He probably would have went over 1,000 in his rookie year, 2019, because he only played 14 games. And then since 2020, at least 1,000 yards in every season. At least 4 or 5 touchdowns. Like, he's a very good wide receiver. You bring up quality of targets. If Jaden Daniels is a quarterback upgrade over anything else Terry McLaurin has had, I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to be the best OC that he's ever had. Then maybe there is some juice to squeeze out of McLaurin. It's a good receiver.
Terry,
I would say years ago, we were taking him a round or 2 higher.
Yeah, he kind of reminds me in a weird way, like him and Sutton are similar in that, like, these are 2 players that like have had awful quarterback play their whole year, similar body type. Terry has been more of a target hog than Sutton has, but similar play style, very good at contested catches. And it could be similar situations where both guys just end up, having one of the better years.
For where McLaurin's going, this again, I'm not bumping him up too far. I think that's silly too. But I am gonna like take a look around. Like, if we look at his ADP right now, and let's see the players going around him. He's going around Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Tank Dell, George Pickens. Normally, I'm like, no, I'm out. I want nothing to do with Terry McLaurin. I like all of those guys better. Terry McLaurin's a little bit more attractive now.
Sure.
Maybe next to, does he have more upside? Because I think Christian Kirk's a nice player. He's a high floor player. I think his ceiling's limited. Does McLaurin bring a similar floor and a higher ceiling than Kirk? If you put McLaurin and Calvin Ridley next to each other, I think they're pretty close. Godwin's the one where I'm probably taking Godwin every single time. And I have, how I feel about George Pickens. I love George as long as Ayuk doesn't go there. Then George Pickens, I think, can have a breakout year. But all of a sudden now, without Dotson there, I do like McLaurin better than some of these other guys, certainly over Jaden Reed in that crowded receiver room.
Yeah, the only I would say, and this is just how I would probably go with Calvin Ridley, just because I trust Brian Callahan more than I do Cliff, and I think the reports that have came out about Calvin Ridley is they're moving him around like similar to how Jamar Chase was moved around, and I like that creativity. Yeah. I don't like there's more around Ridley to draw attention, and I don't think that will affect him too much as a pass catcher. I think he's going to be the number one. Where with Terry, I just worry that this offense won't. It gives me like Jacksonville Jaguars vibes, where last year they were very stagnant, where there just wasn't a lot of pre-snap motion. Like I read something that I think Washington was last or second to last in pre-snap motions this whole preseason. Now, I don't want to overreact because look, some of these teams are running very vanilla plays. So that could be the case, but I do think I prefer Calvin Ridley over Terry.
Yeah, I mean it's fair. I think whose quarterback's better. Because I'm with you now. I feel about the Titans. I think that could be a sleeper offense.
Yeah.
But, you still have those concerns. Like, I think if you need a more stable receiver, I think McLaurin brings a little bit more stability than on a week-to-week basis than Ridley. Obviously, if Ridley plays the way we think he can play, he's going to be better than he was last year in this offense with Callahan.
Sure.
But again, if you already have a shaky receiver room and you need that higher floor player, I think that's where I break the ice a little bit and would mix in more McLaurin over Ridley.
Yeah. No, I can understand I can understand that argument as well.
So let's go to Philly because I think this is where it becomes a little bit more fun when it comes to DeVonta Smith and his role. Now, at the top, we talked about, Dotson's not going to really have that much of a role in this offense. They have a lot of guys. But this now gives the Eagles the flexibility, and we both said this before, to move DeVonta Smith in the slot. And DeVonta Smith in the slot is a very dangerous player. This does move, and DeVonta's already going high. But this makes me like DeVonta Smith that much more. If I know I can get this player in the slot with these weapons and this quarterback, and I love Kellen Moore, I think for years, right? Because DeVonta's been very productive. I don't know if we've seen his ceiling yet. And a lot of that reason is because, I think his natural position is probably in the slot. Another reason why is because they've had instability at offensive coordinator. This year, I think it all can change. Like this Eagles defense, I bring it up all the time. It's going to be a work in progress. They're going to need to score to stay in games, and they're going to have to score to win games. And Kellen Moore, forget about what happened with the Chargers. That was a mess. In Dallas, Kellen Moore, people were Cowboys fans. National media were ready to push Mike McCarthy out the door and make Kellen Moore the head coach. That's how much love Kellen Moore got, what he did with that offense. And now you can make a case where the Eagles offense, he's inheriting more talent, right? He didn't have an A.J. Brown and a DeVonta Smith. He had one.
No.
He didn't have a Saquon Barkley. He had Zeke and Pollard. Zeke was at the end, and Pollard wasn't in his prime. You still have a top offensive line. DeVonta Smith this year, we live in a world where maybe both A.J. Brown, DeVonta Smith are top 12 PPR receivers.
I don't see why not. We talked about it on Spaces yesterday, but it's not outside the range of outcomes for DeVonta Smith to end up finishing higher than A.J. Brown this year. And I love A.J. Brown this year. And I don't think that means A.J. Brown is going to fall outside the top 20 or even top 15. But we saw it last year with the 49ers and what they were able to do with Debo, Kittle, Ayuk, and CMC all were great for fantasy. And this offense is just as talented. The only difference is it's a new system. And so it might take some time. But I saw a statistic today. I mean, DeVonta Smith over the last 2 years averaged 1.85 yards per route run outside and 1.78 yards per route run outside. When he was inside the slot, 3.39, which is insane, and 2.35 in the slot. So this is a guy, like Anthony said, where like he can play outside, right?
Yeah.
But he's good enough where he can do that. But that doesn't mean he should be there, and that doesn't mean he'll be his best there. He is awesome in the slot. Look at what CeeDee Lamb did in the power slot role for Kellen Moore. I think this is going to be huge. And Jahan Dotson doesn't take away from Goddard. I don't think he takes away from really anybody. He'll be there. He may vulture a touchdown in the red zone or something to that effect,
Well,
and he'll be there. But I don't think he's going to take away much from this offense.
now this does take Goddard out of the slot as much because he's versatile himself. I do think this trade does affect Goddard a little bit because I don't see how you're going to line him up in the slot as often as long as all these receivers are healthy. But outside of that,
No, and Goddard doesn't have to be in the slot.
no,
I mean,
no.
so and he can pass. Goddard's very hybrid like, where very Kittle like, where he's not as good of a blocker or athlete as Kittle, but he can block and he can go out. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to be, a receiving threat every time he's out there. And keep in mind, I mean, DeVonta Smith 2 years ago was wide receiver 9 in fantasy. So that ceiling is there. We know he can do it. Now you add in Saquon Barkley, you add in Jalen Hurts, and now you have AJ Brown and Goddard. Like there are a lot of mouths to feed, but I think Goddard's the guy that gets pushed down the most. DeVonta Smith and AJ Brown, I'm not worried about them at all. And I do love Saquon. I think Saquon, AJ, DeVonta, Jalen, all 4 of them, just like the 49ers last year, all 4 of them can be top 15 in their respective positions. Obviously, Hurts is going to be top 5 unless he gets hurt. We know this. So, yeah, I don't think it affects any of them too much. But I think it actually could make DeVonta Smith's ceiling higher because now he's going to be in the slot more.
So let's go to a little bit of news